It's September 19th, 2005. You're running home from school and you get on your old crusty Dell computer. You see a new update by Jagex. It's the TzHaar City, with 2 new map tiles with some of the greatest graphics you've ever seen in the game.
Oh my god! Wow!
7 new monsters, a fight pit minigame, 7 new pieces of combat equipment that are all better than Rune. There's a bank with 3 new shops, and all these possibilities. This is the TzHaar City. Let's take a look at this update and see how it got to where it is now, where it started, and the various changes that made it what it is today. Welcome everybody to the evolution of the TzHaar City. The initial update, as I stated earlier, was on the 19th of September of 2005, and while the update would prove to be very successful, it was missing a few key elements that make TzHaar City, well, TzHaar City. For starters, there was no Onyx. This in turn meant there was no Fury at the time of the release of this update. Also, there was no Fight Caves, which meant no Jad, no Fire Cape, and interestingly enough, no Obsidian Cape. The Obsidian Cape was released actually at the same time as the Fire Cape. Many people think it was just released with TzHaar City along with the initial batch of equipment. That was not the case. Due to the lack of these 4 elements, the Fight Cave, the Fire Cape, the Obsidian Cape, and the Onyx, I would like to focus on the content that was available upon release, and then we'll expand later into what was added just 2 short weeks after the initial update. Let's start with the Fight Pits minigame. This minigame proved to be extremely popular upon release because at the time the only other popular minigame was Castle Wars that involved PvP. And as most of you know that played Castle Wars back then or even today, most of the players that are involved in it only just killed other players. They didn't really care about the flags. This provided the opportunity for players to literally kill other players and that be the only objective, to be the last one standing. So this proved to be a popular element as to why it was so successful. On top of this, it was the best way to obtain Tokal at the time, arguably. It's also a stark contrast to how many games operate today, where they have to either provide the player with a pet or a multitude of cosmetics or a really good equip. That wasn't the case back then. People more played for fun, and I think that's due to just the player base changing. The player base on average has gotten older, which means more responsibility, which means less time, which means they want to be compensated for that time. Back then, that wasn't the case. The only compensation was Tokal, and it was based off the combat levels combined that the winner had eliminated from the fight pits. So the more high levels that were in the fight pits and you defeated them, you got more Tokal. Interestingly enough, if the fight pits minigame drug on too long, waves of monsters and TzHaar creatures would appear and try and eliminate the players and speed things along. The next element would be the mine, which at the time was actually pretty popular due to its distance from the bank. It was only a short walk to the bank, and there was also a lava forge nearby where you could literally mine the gold, run it a short while over to the lava forge, and then bank your gold bars all in one convenient area. Next element that was there on release was the shops, the rune shop, the equipment shop, and the ore shop / gem shop. This was a space that allowed people to spend the Tokal, spend their winnings that they earned from fight pits, spend their drops that they got from the TzHaar because they dropped small amounts of Tokal at a time. The main thing people were going for at the time was some of the equips because the information and data on equips wasn't really as easily accessible as it is now, so you'd have to wait for someone else to get it and want to share that information with you, or you'd have to do it yourself. It was very interesting back in those days. This probably led to a lot of people buying the obsidian knife, which was really bad even at the time. The main equip people really wanted, because you have to imagine the obsidian cape didn't exist right then. So the best equip that most people found was the obsidian shield. There was no rune defender yet, and this obsidian shield was one of the only things that went in the shield slot at the time. They gave a strength bonus, so it was seen as very, very good. Other notable equipment would be the Obsidian Maul due to its high strength bonus, because again, people didn't know how to calculate things such as damage per second, so they see the high strength bonus and they want to go for it. I mean, that could be seen, back then, once the Dragon 2-hand and stuff came out shortly after this, it was actually seen on par with the Abyssal Whip, even though you could compare the DPS without the specials nowadays, and you find that the Whip just destroys the Dragon 2-hand. Back then, that data wasn't easily accessible, so people viewed the D2 hand as on par with the Abyssal Whip. It's just an example. But yeah, you see high levels with the Obsidian Maul, not just your, Obsidian Maul pures like you do nowadays. You would actually see higher levels using the Obsidian Maul. People dabbled with the sword a little bit, the mace, the knife, and the other equipment like the staff, but that wasn't as popular as the shield and the maul at the time. There were probably plenty of people that bought it or went for it initially because, as I said earlier, the data wasn't as easily accessible or, there. The dragon chain body and dragon legs that were out at the time didn't really interfere with any of the obsidian equipment. The obsidian equipment was seen as just vastly better than anything that was out at the time, non-degradable wise. Because Barrows was out at this time, and it was very prevalent. 2005 was really a great year for updates on this game. The next element I would like to talk about, which is actually the last important element that was there upon the first batch of TzHaar City, is the monsters themselves. These monsters drop things such as the Obsidian Shield and Obsidian Weapons. This proved to be extremely successful because things such as the Obsidian Shield sold for 600k at the time, if not more upon release. It's very hard to find that sort of data, but I remember specifically around 2006 when I was playing, the Obsidian Shield was 600k comfortably. Which meant the other equips had to be a few 100k at least, which was a ton of money in those days. Doesn't sound like a lot now, but it was a ton, especially the 600k Obsidian Shield, because you gotta think, no room defender, it's the best shield to go along with your one-handed weapon for strength bonus. There were also elements such as safe spots, so you had low-level rangers and majors that were trying to make a quick buck here too by safe spotting across the lava vents. You'd see a range of low-level safe spotting as well as in-game, high-level players killing these. Then just a few short weeks later came the second batch of the TzHaar City, which introduced the Fight Caves minigame, which in turn introduced at the time the most powerful and hardest PvM challenge available in the entire game. I'm talking about, of course, the level 702 TzHaar. You gotta think back then, you didn't have a toxic blowpipe, you didn't have all these overpowered equips, you didn't even have a dark bow. Your options were the crystal bow, and you had to bring 2 of them to make it through the entire thing, as it was so long, or you could bring a carol bow with over 2k bolt racks to try and make it through the whole entire thing. Like many new updates, people did not know what to expect, but this is one of the first challenges that was introduced into the game that was immensely hard, so it slapped a lot of high-level players right in the face when they would try and make it to Jad. A lot of players didn't even make it to Jad at the time. They had to tweak their inventories and learn themselves because there wasn't really any guides available until probably 6 months to a year after the fact, at least good ones. I mean, just in this clip alone, this guy's using a carol bow. I would say this footage is probably somewhere around late 2005 to early 2006, just by looking at things. Look how many zeros he just hits, and this is probably someone with like 80 range, and he's obviously using one of the best weapons at the time for range, and it just slaps so many zeros. Not to mention at the time, most of the player base, not all, but most, were fairly young, in their early teens, and some of them even like 11, 12. So when they got to this boss, if they even did, they would freeze up due to nerves and the thing would just one-hit them. There was nothing in the game like this at the time. Nothing could just chunk you from 90 plus HP and just kill you in a hit if you messed up. There was nothing that punishing in the game. It was all about fishing and occasionally going to KBD, which were both easy tasks. This really tested a player's skill and patience at the time, as because of the lack of equips, people just overall having lower levels at the time, not knowing what to do. A good Fight Caves run back then, like a really good one, was 2 hours. If not slightly more than that. That was seen as a really good time, whereas nowadays, almost everybody can get a sub 1 hour Fight Caves. When I was originally researching the different fire capes and what they looked like at different stages, I came across multiple posts saying the fire cape was just an orange regular cape. So I thought there was 3 versions. An orange regular cape, called the fire cape, and then the skinnier cape with the animation, and then the modern cape that we know today. It took quite a bit of time, but I actually found out that wasn't the case. So if you were running the game in low detail, as many of us were at the time due to us playing on the family desktop that was slow, probably had 100, megs of RAM, and was running on dial-up connection, most of us ran on low detail. Well, for the Fire Cape to have its running smooth animation, like as you equipped it, you had to run the game in high detail. So this led to a lot of people actually thinking, man, this is just a static, boring orange cape. This sucks. Unlike today, where if you're seen wearing a Fire Cape as a moderately high level, you're made fun of, or just no one takes notice of you for wearing a Fire Cape. Back then, Fire Cape was all the rage. The prestige from it was probably more than the Inferno Cape has today. More prestige than even that. Even though, of course, if you compare the difficulty side by side from back then, even to modern day Inferno, Inferno still edges it out hands down. But the perception was just way different. According to players in 2005, you also could only have one Fire Cape at a time. This was later changed, which meant if you died with the Fire Cape and couldn't get back in time, then you had to go all the way back in the fight caves and do it all, because you didn't have duplicates from doing it. And there was really no reason to do it multiple times. I mean, yeah, you got the Tokel, but it took 2 hours at the time. It wasn't really worth it for just the Tokel, so the only reason you do it is to have extra capes, which you couldn't do initially. But yeah, Jad was slapping up the low levels, he was slapping up the medium levels, he was even slapping up the in-game players that thought they were extremely good. Almost as a consolation prize, but still seen as a very effective and very good cape, came the Obsidian Cape. It came out at the same time as the Fire Cape. Not with the initial batch, but alongside the Fire Cape as almost a consolation prize. It's kind of funny. But you'd get it from the TzHaars, and it was also available in the shop, so if you had all that Tokel available from weeks prior when the first release came out of TzHaar, you could just buy it. It was seen as an upgrade to the Legends Cape, which had now fallen into third place, and if you were a level 126 wearing an Obsidian Cape, nobody cared. In fact, you were seen as kinda wealthy and you'd get a few noobs following you. Next came what I believe to be the second most impactful piece of equipment from this expansion. I'm of course talking about the uncut Onyx, which was seen appearing in the ore shop. It could be bought for an insane amount of Tokel, totaling at 300,000 Tokel. You gotta remember, you got 8k of it for beating the fight caves, which was seen as an immense challenge back then. You got some from doing fight pits, and you got very minute, small amounts from actually killing the TzHaar around the city. So how were they to afford this crap? Even back then, players were known for camping and just doing new content repeatedly for 10 plus hours a day, so they had a decent stockpile of this equipment and multiple duplicates, and everyone wanted to get their hands on this gem. They found out by selling this extra equipment they could get closer and closer to that 300,000 Tokel. Some smarter players even found by saving up 33,333 Chaos Runes and 16,666 Death Runes as an example was enough to sell those to the rune shop for Tokel, and in turn take that Tokel and buy the uncut Onyx. This method was even used as a money-making method of sorts, because you would buy Chaos Runes in World 2, you buy the amount and it would be less than what a Fury would be worth, and if you had high crafting and magic, you could take those Chaos Runes you bought in World 2, near the bank in Falador, and you could take them to TzHaar, sell them to that shop, buy the Onyx, make the Amulet of Fury yourself, and come out with a few 100k profit. The amulet itself was a big upgrade over the Glory. They were both seen as amulets that could really do it all, although the Glory was the best in slot at the time for range and magic. And technically speaking, it would still keep that title even once the Amulet of Fury entered the game. The Amulet of Fury surpassed the Glory in terms of defense and melee strength, although the Amulet of Strength still beat out the Fury, so they were just both jack-of-trade amulets. Fury was just better, overall, just better version of the Glory. And that was reflected deeply in its price. The Fury was definitely a luxury item. You didn't need it by any means. You could do any piece of content in the game with the Glory. After the second batch update, other than some, minor tweaks, bug fixes, and the like, there wasn't a whole lot that happened in the few following years. Here's a look at some graphical updates. On the far left is what we know on Old School. As you get closer to the right, you get to what is on RS3. As you reach the furthest right of each row, respectively, you reach what you can see nowadays, present day, in-game on RS3. That's what they now look like, rock monsters. So February 14th, 2012, another solo challenge was added. This was the fight kiln. To some, it was a challenge. I didn't think it was too big of a challenge. Most people, the general consensus was that if you could do fight caves even in 2012, then you could do fight kiln. It wasn't that difficult, and one different thing that this brought out was a best in slot for each style. It had a melee cape, a range cape, and a mage cape. And I'm just going to briefly touch on those and kind of leave it at that. RS3 also saw its, release of quests. It had a few various quests that revolve around there. But as far as, groundbreaking content, there hasn't been much that I've seen, after the fight kiln. Nothing that big. Quests, of course they're important, but nothing groundbreaking like fight kiln or Inferno or fight caves and all of that. Nothing that serious. So now that we're back to old school, it's now June 1st, 2017, and more old rec has been releasing the upgraded TzHaar kets, which are level 221, as well as the obsidian armor dropped by those same kets that actually gave strength bonus. So the plate body is like a welfare torso, the legs are a welfare tassets, and the helm gives a few strength as well, but the armor bonus of this set I think is like around what adamant is. It's not as good as rune defensively, but it still has its place and it was still pretty unique and cool. More importantly, yet another solo PVM challenge came, and this was the most difficult yet. So here you have a side-by-side of the fire cape on the left, and then the better Inferno cape, or Infernal cape, that you get from the Inferno. As you can see, it doubles the strength bonus, a slight increase to defense, and some really good offensive stats. The first person to actually complete the Inferno was Wooks. He did it on his Twitch stream in front of tens of thousands of live viewers. I remember it being a pretty crazy event at the time, just the amount of people that were watching him. Pretty impressive how calm he stayed during this footage. And this was something that took multiple days after release as well for anyone to finish. It was very impressive. It's still impressive today. To say the least, TzHaar has touched millions of lives. It's improved them for the better. We all have happy memories there, and nobody can take those away from us. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. All the typical YouTube stuff to do. It helps me out. And yeah, guys, I will see you next time. I upload 2 to 3 of these a week, or at least I'm going to try these historic videos. I really enjoy doing them. And yeah, bye.